And many of us do that as well. We pass on parental advice, like these bite-sized pieces of wisdom, so that our kids can make good decisions in this life. They can relate well with others, and they can be the best that they can be. Perhaps you've said things like, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. If you keep doing that, your face will get stuck. If you try your best, you'll do well. Don't take yourself so seriously. Be grateful for what you have. Don't let the bad things get you down, or don't chew with your mouth open. And at the Reese household, you might hear things like, you can't control how people act, but you can control how you react, or treat people how you want to be treated. If you play aggressively, you're going to get hurt. It'll hurt for a little while, but then it'll stop hurting. And every now and then we throw out this classic Taylor Swift Frozen combo of shake it off and let it go. So what about you all? What are some of the little tidbits of wisdom that you may have passed on to your kids?
I'll give you something to cry about.
Oh, that's a beautiful one. Any others? I'm sure you've all got some great ones storing up, and later you'll be like, Dave, what about this one, and this one, and that one? There'll be some great things. But as we wrap up our time in Titus this week, I want to look at some of the parental advice that Paul gives to Titus. Paul and Titus had this strong and deep relationship. In fact, Paul says this about him. He writes to Titus, my true son in our common faith. So he sees the relationship between him and Titus as a familial, intimate relationship, like a father to his son. And they're united over this deeply personal faith, this love for God that they have together. And the two of them have spent years traveling together. They weathered storms, both figurative and literal. And now Paul is sending his spiritual son out into the world by himself, sent on a mission to train and equip leaders of churches. We've talked about this. He sent them to the island of Crete, where these people had this bad reputation of being liars, evil beasts, and lazy gluttons. And so as we've seen, Paul's given Titus a lot of advice. And now he wants to wrap up his time by giving him 3 bits of spiritual wisdom, 3 bits of parental advice from a father to a son. Be kind, avoid fights, and do good. So, over the past, so his first piece of advice is to be kind. Several years ago when Dawn was teaching, she heard this phrase going around, throw kindness like confetti. What in the world does that mean? I mean, I don't go around throwing confetti very often, maybe at a special occasion like New Year's Eve. Woohoo, yay. So are we only supposed to throw kindness around at special occasions? Or, confetti is just a huge mess. All these little pieces of paper end up everywhere. I can imagine how annoying it is for those people who have to clean up Times Square after New Year's Eve or other these big celebrations. So is kindness this messy, annoying thing that has to be thrown around? I don't think that's what Paul's getting at. He's telling his true son in the faith to this. He says, be kind, always showing gentleness to all people. Paul is telling Titus to have this mindset, this persona of being kind, generous, gracious, full of love. When we think about kindness, so we're probably thinking about, just being nice to someone. Maybe being a positive or upbeat person, being just a friendly kind of person. And that's part of what Paul's getting at, but that's not completely what he's saying. Paul says, when he's saying that to be kind and show gentleness, he's telling Titus to extend grace, to seek justice, to avoid injustice, to care for people deeply. This word kindness, the Greek word that he's referring to, needs to not be focused on the letter of the law, and forget the spirit of the law. In other words, don't be so legalistic, don't be so caught in the black and the white, the right and the wrong, that you forget to be compassionate and sympathetic, being kind and understanding. Because most of us live in a world filled with graves. And when we see something that goes against our strict moral code, we shouldn't be just so quick to condemn, but we should look for ways to offer understanding and grace. Be kind, always showing gentleness to all people. We show gentleness by understanding that there are delicate nature to situations that we need to understand and take time to respond in situations in a loving and caring way, not to be quick to judge, not to be quick to become angry, or be ready to attack, or to be defensive. So we get into these tense situations, take some time to assess what's going on. Control your temper, be slow to anger, and abounding in love. William Barclay, he writes this about showing gentleness. He says, a gentle person knows when to be angry and when not to be angry. They patiently bear the wrongs done to them and are ready to spring to help those who have had wrong done to them. So when we offer kindness and gentleness, it's not that we're being a doormat, but we're being thoughtful and compassionate. We're being selfless, considering and caring for others, even if it costs us our own comfort. So why does Paul offer this advice to his spiritual son? Well, part of that is because kindness and gentleness go against our natural inclination. We have to continually learn to practice being kind. I mean, any of us who have attempted to raise kids knows that it's not really your default human nature to be kind and gentle. It's a learned behavior, something we have to continually to teach our children and to teach ourselves, because our sinful nature is always fighting against it. So Paul is telling him to go against his sinful nature and to be kind and gentle. Listen to how he describes how our human nature really is. He says that we are foolish, disobedient, enslaved by various passions and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful, detesting one another. It's not a pretty picture. As members of the human race, we are enslaved or held captive to our selfish passions and our guilty pleasures. We naturally look out for ourselves above others. And it leads us to make these foolish choices where we live in malice and envy and detesting others. It's not a pleasant picture. Our sinfulness and selfishness always leads us away from being kind and gentle. And that's why we have to continue to practice it. If kindness and gentleness goes against our nature, well, why should we fight it? Maybe we should just let it be. But Paul explains that's not what we should do. The reason that we should be kind, the reason we should be gentle, is because kindness and gentleness have been shown to us. He said that when the kindness of God, our Savior, and his love for mankind appeared, he saved us. His appeared kindness is none other than Jesus. Jesus is God's incarnational kindness and gentleness. Jesus came to earth as the physical representation of God's kindness for humanity. Jesus loves us, and he became one of us. He took on our foolishness, our malice, our detesting of others. He took all that upon himself when he went on to the cross. By his sacrifice, he rescued us from the weight of our sin, not just the eternal ramifications, but the daily acts of disobedience and deceit. And so our motivation for showing kindness and gentleness to others is that it has been extended to us over and over again. When you find yourself in a place where your anger and your disobedience wants to take control and you want to lash out, remember that kindness has been given to you. And one of the best ways to extend kindness, as Paul would give his next piece of parental advice, is to avoid foolish fights. Another popular parental advice that goes around the Reese household is, brothers gonna brug. And you might think, that sounds as dumb as throw kindness like confetti. What in the world does that even mean? What's brothers gonna brug mean? Brug? Is that a word? I don't think so. All right. But the heart of it is, your brother or sister or sibling or someone is going to naturally get on your nerves. Siblings are going to do things that frustrate you because they're designed to produce a negative emotional response. They're wanting to get at you. And I know I have 3 siblings. We were always trying to annoy and get at the other. And so when that happens, we need to rise above it. Don't let what your sibling says or anybody say really, or how they're acting, get under your skin. Don't allow it to propagate into something greater. They're smacking their gum, just let go. If they're using your screen, well, who cares? Just take some time, let them do it. Sometimes the best idea is to simply avoid a foolish fight. Paul is saying, Cretan is going to creep. The people you're called to lead, they want to argue. They want to complain over stupid things. They're going to want to cause divisions with others. And your job is to rise above it. Avoid the foolish fights and arguments, because the only place they lead you is down. He says, avoid foolish debates, genealogies, quarrels, disputes about law, because they are unprofitable and worthless. In the early church, there were a lot of bickering and quarrels over what seems like stupid things. Things like, whether people should eat kosher, or they should be circumcised, or eating meat sacrificed to idols, or who are the true apostles, and so much more. Thank God the church no longer argues over such foolish arguments, right? We've gone a long way. All sarcasm aside, I wonder what Paul would think, or what he would want to write to people today when he sees some of the disputes we have. We live in a time where people are openly and vindictively engaged in foolish debates and quarrels. And the people who claim to be Christians can be some of the most offensive. We seem to have lost our filter, and we have this innate need to engage in conversations that are unprofitable and worthless. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting together with people and having a discussion over the issues. It's good to find somebody who has a different point of view than you and talk about these issues. But when you talk about issues with somebody, listen to them. Truly listen to their perspective. Don't wait for them to finish their thoughts so that you can interject your opinion or correct how they're wrong. Try to learn from them. Try to understand their perspective. And you might not change your point of view, but at least you'll come away with a better viewpoint of them. Because if we can just openly discuss these things, that will help us. But the truth is, if we look around this room and the people that even aren't here, if we think about some of these issues that are going on in our world, that are plaguing our churches and our nations, many of us have different opinions on these things. There are different perspectives. And we could easily start these heated debates even in this very room, on things like gun control or capital punishment, race relations, abortion, LGBT issues, and so many more. But most of us, by God's grace, have chosen as we come to worship, decide to leave these points of view outside so that we can avoid foolish fights and we come to respect each other. Now, there's a difference, though, between people who disagree and divisive people. Paul wants Titus to understand that there are going to be people who want to spread chaos. They find satisfaction in disrupting and division. William Barclay, he writes this: a divisive person has decided that they are right and everybody else is wrong. I'm sure we all know people like that. They have made their own idea the test of all truth. Be careful of any opinion which separates a person from the fellowship of believers. True faith does not divide, it unites. We all know people who love to cause problems, that are actively at work, pulling people apart, creating factions. So what do we do when we run into these people? Well, Paul offers a little bit of advice that maybe seems a little strange to us. He says to reject a divisive person. Wait, reject a divisive person? That seems a little harsh. We can't reject people. What kind of Christian would do that? Shouldn't we learn to listen to them and hear their voice? Aren't we supposed to be kind and gentle? But really, sometimes the most kind and gentle thing we can do is to not engage with them, and to send them away because we see that they're actually doing more harm to others. Paul offers this parental advice that seems harsh because he cares deeply. He cares not just for Titus, his son, but for the rest of the church. And so he says to him, reject a divisive person after the first and second warning. So go to them, warn them of their divisiveness. Give them a chance to understand what's going on and the problems that they're causing. But if that person isn't convinced by the second time, the likelihood of them changing is quite low. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Our modern thinking, you might think, well, sending them away is wrong. Shouldn't we keep them close and try to convince them? But the longer we keep them around, the more validity we're giving them, the more divisive they're becoming, the more damaging it can cause. Paul says that such a person has gone astray and is sinning and is self-condemned. As we know, there's that phrase, one bad apple spoils the bunch, right? So one little bit of discord can cause a lot more in there. Another thing Paul says in Galatians, he talks about false teaching is like a little yeast that spreads through the whole batch of dough. So this little yeast, like a divisive person, infects and spreads and causes division to rise and grow. In fact, Paul's advice, which might seem kind of harsh, is very similar to the advice that Jesus gives. So he says that if a brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. So he says, go and talk to that person. Try to help them understand, get to know the person. As Don likes to say, to nip it in the bud. We want to get to the issue. But, Jesus continues, if they do not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established in the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So that you go and you talk to that person and they aren't able to change, you bring to them a couple other people who are credible, maybe have seen what's going on. Then, if they're still divisive, it says if they refuse to listen, tell it to the church. Let the congregation understand what's going on, the havoc that is occurring. and to help dispel the things that are causing division. Many years ago, I visited this church. It was kind of actually going through a process like this. There was someone in the congregation, I had no idea what was going on. I'd only visited that church a couple times and didn't really stay for other reasons, but the pastor was explaining a little bit about what was going on. And he was addressing to the congregation why Jesus would say this. He says, if they refuse to tell it to the church, and then he says, if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them like you would treat a pagan or a tax collector. Which seems kind of harsh, until the pastor pointed out that the way Jesus treated tax collectors and pagans. He loved them, cared for them, he continually offered them grace and understanding. But when we're dealing with a divisive person, don't engage in these foolish arguments trying to win them over. Sometimes we just simply need to let them go. Don't engage, just pray for them. Show them love, but set them free, so they may experience the grace of God and hopefully return to their faith. Now, the final piece of parental advice that Paul gives to Titus, and we've heard it many times before, is to do good. It's kind of been the theme throughout our series here through Titus, is to be devoted to good. In fact, week 1, we talked about how Paul was encouraging Titus to live and lead by example, to be a person who is devoted to good. And then our second week, we talked about how Paul wanted Titus to encourage the older men and older women to pass on to the younger men and younger women what it means to be self-controlled and submitted and being devoted to good. In our third week, we talked about how Titus was to choose leaders who were known by their quality and their character. They were men and women who are devoted to leading and devoted to good. And our fourth week, we talked about how God pours out His Holy Spirit on all who believe on Him, so that we can be people who are devoted to good. And last week, we talked about how we live in this time between appeared grace and appearing glory. And while we're living in the middle, we are to be people who are devoted to good. And this idea has been repeated throughout the book of Titus. He says, in chapter 2, he says, make yourself an example of good works with integrity and dignity. We're supposed to show our good works by being people who have integrity, who teach with dignity. And then he says, later in chapter 2, that Jesus gave Himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to cleanse us for Himself, a people for His own possession, eager to do good works. We should be eager to do good works, excited to show the goodness of God to others because of what Jesus went through. These good works that we do are a way of showing thanks to God for all that He has done for us. And chapter 3, verse 1, it says to be ready for every good work. And we should be always looking for a way to do good to others. And in 3:8, he says, those who have believed God might be careful to devote themselves to good works, because our good works are a response of our faith. Our faith leads us to do good. So this piece of advice, be no surprise, at the very end, almost the second to last verse, he gives them this, and he says, let our people learn to devote themselves to good works, to pressing needs, so they will not be unfaithful. Paul is explaining that this idea of doing good as well as a learned behavior. As we said earlier, we're not naturally inclined to look out for others, and we are self-focused, and we need to be reminded over and over to do good, to practice doing good, to devote ourselves to good works. Because the more we do something, the more it becomes a habit, the more it becomes more natural to us. And the reason that we're to do good are many, but one reason is because there are many needs around us. The reason we're to do good is that there are pressing needs all around us. It says that we do good works for the pressing needs. The needs of our world are pressing. The weight of the world is heavy on the shoulders of so many. Their needs are pressing down on them. And the people of God are called to do good, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to devote ourselves to caring for the physical needs, to bringing clean water, to offering food, caring for those who are without homes, those who are living in poverty, those who are lives have been disrupted by war or natural disaster. We care for the physical needs, the emotional needs of people with depression and addiction and anxieties. We're going to care for the spiritual needs of people, to show them their need for Jesus, their love that He offers them. And so many people around us, they need to experience the goodness of Jesus. But unfortunately, they don't see the goodness of Jesus in the lives of those who claim to follow Him. But when we do good, when we put goodness into practice, we are being a witness for Christ. But not only we do good for others, we're to do good to help ourselves, to be fruitful, to grow deeper in our faith and our connection with God. It gives our lives meaning and purpose. Where our lives were once defined by our selfishness, we now can grow into the soil of God's goodness so that we can be people who have the fruits of the Spirit flourishing in us, blossoming into love and joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And so as we wrap up our time in Titus, we get these little bits of wisdom from Paul. So as you spend time this week out there with your family, with your co-workers, with your friends, your doctors, whoever you end up spending time with, take Paul's advice with you. Be kind. Remember that God has poured out His overwhelming kindness on you, more than you deserve. Because of that, you can show kindness to others. And when you find yourself in a difficult situation, just remember that kindness that has been given to you so that you can extend it to others. And then avoid foolish fights. If someone says something that irritates you, try not to engage. When someone posts something online that ruffles your feathers, you don't need to respond. If your husband says something that irritates you, maybe just check yourself. Maybe, is it really something you need to call them out on? If your wife says something that annoys you, remember you said plenty of stupid and annoying things to her all the time. Maybe you should just let it go. Foolish fights can only divide. Finally, do good. There are many pressing needs all around us. I could take time, we can list plenty. We can look around as we drive through our communities. We can see the needs. So spend time. Ask God to open your eyes to a need around you, a way to respond to that need, so that you can do good. So as Papa Paul says, be kind, avoid foolish fights, and do good. Amen.